Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. And if you can, it would be great to get a comment or something so I can see that we have gone live. Okay. I wonder if anyone can just acknowledge with a thumbs up in the comments box that we're live and that you can see me and hear me. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Salvador. And good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Rahman. I'm the Country Director, Sri Lanka, for the British Council. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here tonight for a conversation and the dramatic reading of Funny Boy with an insanely talented and dynamic cast. I'm by no means the main attraction, so I will keep my words brief. I'll begin by saying a welcome to you all. It's a rainy, grey, cloudy day evening here in Sri Lanka, and so I hope you're all nice and warm and looking forward to the next hour and 15 minutes. Yes, so thank you first of all to you for joining tonight. I wanted to say a few words on Pride, why we're doing this event, and then and I'll hand over after that to Ashok, who will very ably take us through the rest of the evening. So Pride, the month of June, which we've just seen to a close, is a recognition of the talents, the achievements of the LGBT community, and also a celebration of everything that they've achieved despite the challenges, the challenges that they face, that they continue to face, and also an acknowledgement of the road we still have to travel to get to equality for all. We see so much of the success of this community and how far they've come that sometimes we forget how recent it was that some of the inequalities and injustices that they were facing around the world were just as soon as recent as a decade, 2 decades ago. And again, it is a celebration of how far this community has come and its struggle for equality. So, you know, at the front of my mind is that, yes, this is a celebration, but we should also be very soberly looking at the challenges that the community faces and the responsibility that we have allies to support the struggle for equal rights for everyone. Which brings me to the British Council. As many of you will know, we are a global organization. At the heart of what we do is cultural relations. For us, the people-to-people connection is at the heart of our work. And so when we talk about our work, we talk about it in the areas of education, of English, of arts and culture. And I think it's through the lens of art and culture in particular that we can highlight some of the achievements and, again, some of the challenges of the LGBT community. So, you know, we're using tonight the medium of literature to explore some of these themes through the novel Funny Boy. But you know, in the last couple of years, the British Council here in Sri Lanka and globally has often done it through arts and also film in particular as well, when we've supported film festivals, when we've worked with 5 Films for Freedom, the 5 films, the short films that we share globally in February to highlight LGBTQ issues and so on. It's just sort of using the power of art to create awareness, sometimes to educate, sometimes to create empathy for people who might be different from us, and to challenge sometimes decades-long, lifelong prejudice and, you know, unchallenged prejudice. It's so powerful to be able to use art through literature, through film, through the visual arts to challenge some of these assumptions. So with that in mind, an enormous thank you to the talented cast who agreed to do this dramatic reading with us. I'll just say from me, on behalf of the British Council, thank you, Ashok. Thank you, Shyam, Brendan, Nimmi, and Rehan. It's amazing that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to do this with us. Incredibly grateful. I'm really looking forward to a powerful, funny, poignant performance and conversation. I'll hand over now to Ashok. Thank you again, and a warm welcome to everyone.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you to the British Council for organizing this and making this possible. Without more ado, let me go and introduce my panelists. I'm delighted to have, as a celebration of Pride Month, I'm delighted to have Shyam Selvadurai, one of Sri Lanka's greatest authors. Shyam, can we have you up on screen, please? Do we have Shyam? Ah, there you are. A very good morning to you from a very rainy Colombo evening. Shyam Selvadurai. Then we have three actors, the three main actors of the film that was co-written by Shyam and Deepa Mehta and directed by the iconic Deepa Mehta. There are Nimmi Harasgama. Hi, Nimmi. People can see you up on screen. Nimmi, have we lost you?
We don't have her yet, Ashok.
Okay, not to worry. I'll just introduce the others by name, and then I'll continue with you, Shyam. So there's Nimmi Harasgama, then there's Brandon Ingram, who was cast as RG, the protagonist in the film, and Rehan Mudannayake, who was his boyfriend in the movie, his love interest. Okay, look, let's start with Shyam, since we're not getting the others on screen. Shyam, I'd like to ask you a question which I asked years ago. There's Brandon. Hello, Brandon. Hi.
Hi.
Joining us. And thank you, Rehan, for being here. Shyam, do you consider yourself a gay writer or a writer who happens to be gay? Or are the two the same?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you left out the most important part of my identity, which is Sri Lankan. I think I consider myself a Sri Lankan Canadian writer who happens to be gay. And I think that's probably because the gay identity is so tied to whiteness and white male privilege that I just never have quite belonged in it. And I don't think most people like me actually ever have belonged in it. So in a sense, culturally, it feels very, it continues to feel alien to me and to other BIPOC people. So, but the culture that seems to be more comfortable is actually the Sri Lankan part. Oddly, you think, being Tamil and everything, I feel very uncomfortable with it. But actually, I don't. I feel it's also the part that engages me the most artistically as well.
Do you ever see a time when you might write a novel that doesn't have a gay theme, for instance?
Yes, I'm already writing a novel that doesn't have a gay theme. It's already coming out next year. Unfortunately, the queer subplot got tanked because it didn't work
along the way. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Now, when Funny Boy came out, it was your first novel. Did you have any idea of the enormous success and the enormous impact it would have on generations? It's 27 years ago, so the longevity of this novel is staggering. Did you have any idea of that when you wrote the first collection?
No, I had absolutely no idea because there was sort of nothing like it. So I just thought a small press will take it, and then that will be it. And I certainly never assumed it will be ready in Sri Lanka, not just for the gay content, but also for the political content. And in fact, I made a trip before the novel came out to try and do research for Cinnamon Gardens, because I didn't think I'd be allowed back in the country. But then the government changed, warning to all Sri Lankan governments, you never know when they're going to get tanked. But I think that so then everything, and I don't know, I think it just caught the moment. And then it just took off, and it's just been read constantly and consistently since then. I don't really know why.
Yes, I mean, not only did it catch the moment, but it continued to be in the moment. I remember hearing you for the very first time at the British Council, and there was such a crowd. We actually had to stand on the road and listen to you. It was extraordinary. I don't think Sri Lanka had ever seen anything like it. And that is such
I was also really shocked because we'd been to Yala and we had just come back, and I was literally changing in the Jeep before I came in, and I hadn't changed my shoes. And
yeah. I didn't get that far. We didn't see you. We just heard you.
A friend of mine pointed that out after the reading. Yeah, I was really shocked. I was absolutely shocked by the crowd that came out.
Now tell me, does it ever annoy you when this book kind of takes the limelight? I know authors think of their books as children, and you have many other truly excellent books. But this one kind of, like The Eldest Child, is rather spoiled. It hogs the limelight. Does that annoy you at all?
It used to make me feel insecure for a little while. And then I just suddenly thought, most writers don't actually have a book like this. Your whole career, and you cannot have a book that sort of lasts this long and that is loved generation after generation. So just be grateful for it, and be grateful for all the advantages it has brought you, all the adventures, like adventure writing the screenplay, and just be happy with it. And I really, I suppose, I know I'm a writer. I mean, I write books, and they're the books that I want to write, and I don't seem to be sort of a one-shot wonder. Like, I mean, in the sense that I have this collection of books now, right, behind me, and more coming, and more than I can actually produce. I mean, I have so many things I want to do that can't actually be. I don't know if I ever get to them in my lifetime. So I think in that sense, it's not really I just enjoy that it's brought me this.
How has the Sri Lankan reaction to this book over the 27 years? How has that changed? It is actually taught in schools now, isn't it? It is part of their A-level syllabus. Do you find a change in people's attitudes to you and so on over those 27 years?
I think what the change is in the student population, because when I frequently go to places like Columbia University or Kelaniya to speak about the book, mostly because I love meeting the students. It's a real pleasure to meet them. So, but they've changed over time. Now it's like, at the beginning when I first went, people were kind of like, I've dropped down from Mars because I was gay. And the last time I did an event there, it was clear that people were actually out. So the students who were asking questions were out. And I just thought, wow, we've just come such a long way as a country. Maybe it's just a microcosm of the university, but it was still it's very heartening.
Yeah. Oh gosh, lovely, lovely. Now, Shyam, we're going to go into the readings. Before we do that, before we bring Nimmi on, just explain very quickly what Bride, the game was. Was it something you played as a child? Because that was set the scene for.
Yeah, but I didn't want to be the bride. I wanted to be the wedding planner.
Okay,
So my parents thought I should be in theater because of that. Yeah. And I got marched off to Wendy Watmore. That began the whole thing. So.
We're going to bring Nimmi on to read a very, what for me is a very moving passage, where Arji, the protagonist, is wearing the sari because, of course, he is the bride. Not, there are plenty of girl cousins, but he was and wants to be and is the bride. And he's caught out by his aunt, and all hell breaks loose. Nimmi, do we have you? Are you? Good evening, Nimmi. Good evening.
Hi.
It's always the case with online things. You never know till you're on, but you're on.
I know. I'm just like, let's see. Can you hear me properly?
Let me introduce you to the viewers before I do anything else. One of Sri Lanka's most talented actresses, and I particularly remember her reading from one of my books, and it was actually the best reading ever. She has such a perfect sense of humor, and I always think that one day I will write a comedy for you, because that.
Thank you.
Apart from your other talents, you have a truly fine sense of comic timing. But readers might recognize you from the Good Karma Hospital in one of your less glamorous avatars as the nurse. Am I annoying you by saying this?
No, sometimes she puts a bit of makeup on and puts a sari on and goes to a wedding. Okay.
Nimmi, I need you to speak just a shade louder because the volume is a little low. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better. Much better.
Okay.
Okay, Nimmi, I'd like you to read this passage. If you've got the book in front of you and you're watching, it's page 12.
Okay, here we go. Gosh. When the bride was finally dressed, Lakshmi, the maid of honor, went out of Janaki's room to make sure that everything was in place. Then she gave the signal, and the priest and choir boys began to sing with a certain want of harmony and correct lyrics. The voice that breathed o'er Eden, the first and glorious day, Solemnly, I made my way down the steps toward the altar that had been set up at one end of the back garden. When I reached the altar, however, I heard the kitchen door open. I turned to see her fatness with Kanthi Auntie. The discordant singing died out. Kanthi Auntie's benevolent smile had completely disappeared, and her eyes were narrowed with anger. "Who's calling my daughter fatty? Huh?" Kanthi Auntie said. She came to the edge of the porch. We stared at her, no one daring to own up. Her gaze fell on me, and her eyes widened for a moment. Then a smile spread across her face. "What's this? Huh?" she said, the honey seeping back into her voice. She came down a few steps and crooked her finger at me. I looked down at my feet and refused to go to her. Come here," she said. Unable to disobey her command any longer, I went to her. She looked me up and down for a moment, and then gingerly, as if she were examining raw meat at the market, turned me around. "What's this you're playing?" she said. "It's bride, Auntie," Sonali said. Bride? Her hand closed on my arm in a tight grip. "Come with me," she said. I resisted, but her grip tightened, her nails digging into my elbow. She pulled me up the porch steps towards the kitchen door.
No, I don't want to."
Something about the look in her eyes terrified me so much I did the unthinkable and I hit out at her. This made her hold my arm even more firmly. She dragged me through the kitchen, past Janaki, who looked up curious, and into the corridor and towards the drawing room. I felt a heaviness begin to build in my stomach. Instinctively, I knew that Kanthi Auntie had something terrible in mind. As we entered the drawing room, Kanthi Auntie cried out, her voice brimming over with laughter. "See what I found?" The other aunts and uncles looked up from their papers or bestirred themselves from their sleep. They gazed at me in amazement, as if I had suddenly made myself visible like a spirit. I glanced at them, and then at Amma's face. Seeing her expression, I felt my dread deepen. I lowered my eyes. The sari suddenly felt suffocating around my body, and the hairpins which held the veil in place pricked at my scalp. Then the silence was broken by the booming laugh of Cyril Uncle, Kanthi Auntie's husband. As if she had been hit, Amma swung around in his direction. The other aunts and uncles began to laugh too, and I watched as Amma looked from one to the other like a trapped animal. Her gaze finally came to rest on my father, and for the first time I noticed that he was the only one not laughing. Seeing the way he kept his eyes fixed on his paper, I felt the heaviness in my stomach begin to push its way up my throat.
"Hey, Chelva. Looks like you have a funny one here."
My father pretended he had not heard, and with an inclination of his head, indicated to Amma to get rid of me. She waved her hand in my direction, and I picked up the edges of my veil and fled to the back of the house. That evening, on the way home, both my parents kept their eyes averted from me. Amma glanced at my father occasionally, but he refused to meet her gaze. Sonali, sensing my unease, held my hand tightly to hers. Later, I heard my parents fighting in their room.
"How long has this been going on?"
I don't know. It was as new to me as it was to you.
"You should have known. You should have kept an eye on him.
What should I have done? Stood over him while he was playing?
If he turns out funny like that Rankotvera boy, if he turns out to be the laughing stock of Colombo, it'll be your fault. You always spoil him and encourage all his nonsense.
What do I encourage?
You're the one who allows him to come in here while you're dressing and play with your jewelry."
Amma was silent in the face of the truth. Of the three of us, I alone was allowed to enter Amma's bedroom and watch her get dressed for special occasions. It was an experience I considered almost religious. For even though I adored the goddesses of the local cinema, Amma was the final statement in female beauty. When Amma was finished, she would check to make sure that the back of the sari had not risen up with the pinnings of the palu, then move back and look at herself in the mirror. Standing next to her or seated on the edge of the bed, I too would look at her reflection in the mirror. And with the contented sigh of an artist who has finally captured the exact effect he wants, I would say,
You should have been a film star, Amma.
She would cry and lightly smack the side of my head. A film star? She would, what kind of low-class type of person do you think I am? One day, about a week after the incident at my grandparents', I positioned myself outside my parents' bedroom door. When Anula arrived with the sari, Amma took it and quickly shut the door. I waited patiently, thinking Amma had not yet put on her blouse and skirt. But the door never opened. Finally perplexed that Amma had forgotten, I knocked timidly on the door. She did not answer, but I could hear her moving around inside. I knocked a little louder and called out.
Amma!
Still no response. And I was about to call her name again when she replied gruffly, Go away! Can't you see I'm busy? I stared disbelievingly at the door. Inside, I could hear the rustle of the sari as it brushed along the floor. I lifted my hand to knock again, when suddenly I remembered the quarrel I had heard on the night of that last spend the day. My hand fell limply by my side. I crept away quietly to my bedroom, sat down on the edge of my bed, and stared at my feet for a long time. It was clear to me that I had done something wrong, but what it was, I couldn't comprehend. I thought of my father and what he said about turning out funny. The word funny. As I understood it, it meant either humorous or strange, as in the expression, that's funny. Neither of these fitted the sense in which my father had used the word, for there had been a hint of disgust in his tone. Later, Amma came out of her room and called Anula to give her instructions for the evening. As I listened to the sound of her voice, I realized that something had changed forever between us.
Thank you, Nimmi.
Did you hear me? Could you hear it?
Yes,
Or was it?
that was wonderful. It is so poignant and moving. For me, it's one of the most moving parts of that book. You have this young mother with the whole weight of the world's disapproval on her shoulders. Because, of course, in the usual patriarchal way, the woman is to blame. If the child turns out funny, it's her fault. It's never the father's fault. As a young mother yourself, do you find, is it any different in Sri Lanka today than it was when this was written?
I mean, I have a son. He's 8 years old, and we live with my mom and Tammy and my husband, Arjunan. And our family unit is very unique. Nobody's blaming anybody for anything. My son gets to play with makeup, and he plays cricket, and I don't know what it's like out there really, but I know that the school he goes to is extremely progressive. And unfortunately, of course, it is out there. I don't know whether they're still blaming mums for what's going on, but I know that a lot of work needs to be done, as Maria mentioned. And I think it's up to us to help with that work and show how progressive we are and make that clear that this is okay and this is how to live.
Thank you very much for that, Nimmi. Time to move on now to Brandon, the protagonist, RG, and Brandon will read a passage from the very first time that he has had sex with his boyfriend, and he's in the family home in the garage. He's just come out of that, Brandon, fire away. It's over to you.
When I stepped outside, I was momentarily blinded by the glare of the sun. I squinted and looked down the deserted driveway. Sonali and her friends must have given up on us and gone to play another game. Shehan and I made our way to the front of the house. I felt suddenly afraid at the thought of meeting anyone. I looked down at my trousers to see if the wetness had seeped through. Except for a small spot, it was not visible. Shehan's clothes were wrinkled, and I glanced anxiously at mine, wondering if they, too, bore signs of what I had just done in the garage. Shehan noticed that I was looking myself over, and he smiled.
Don't worry. You look fine.
I ignored him and continued to inspect my clothes. The front veranda, too, was deserted. As we went up the steps, I heard the clatter of cutlery and plates in the dining room and the murmur of voices. We had been in the garage so long that my family had started lunch. Now Shehan seemed a little alarmed too. When we entered the dining room, the family looked up at us.
Oh, there you are. I was wondering where you had gone.
We went for a walk.
At this time, you could have caught sunstroke, no child.
My parents and Neelia auntie were looking at Shehan, waiting to be introduced. Diggy was glowering at him. "This is Shehan," I said. My parents and Neelia auntie bowed their heads slightly. Once lunch was over, Shehan and I left the dining room as soon as it was politely possible to do so. I took him to my room and shut the door behind us.
Was something wrong in there?
Shehan said and motioned with his head towards the dining room. "Nothing."
Your father didn't like me.
"Rubbish." Shehan was looking closely at me, and I turned away and studied my bookshelf. "Do you want to play a game?" I asked. In reply, he came up behind me and tried to encircle me with his arms. I broke away from him. "Are you mad? What would happen if someone came in and found us?" He lifted his hand in apology. Then he sat on the edge of the bed. "I have Scrabble, Chinese checkers, and Ludo. Which do you want to play?" He didn't answer. He was looking down at his hand sulkily. I felt irritated with him. "I have Scrabble, Chinese checkers."
I heard you.
"Which one will it be then?"
I don't know. Scrabble? Doesn't really matter.
I took down the Scrabble box and began to set it up on the bed. "Shall we play with the dictionary or not?"
Not.
I put my hands into the Scrabble bag and took out 7 letters. Then I passed the bag to him. He looked at the bag but didn't take any letters. "Aren't you going to play?" He didn't reply. "Fine, we don't have to play." I began to empty all my letters back into the bag.
You're feeling guilty. You're feeling guilty about what we did.
Why should I feel guilty?
Because you think it's bad?
And what do you think? What does your head prefect think? He looked up at me, startled. I stared directly at him, refusing to apologize.
I don't know what you're talking about.
"Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Don't think I don't know about you."
You're jealous.
"What?"
I believe you're jealous.
"Why should I be jealous of such a disgusting thing? The whole school knows about you. You're the laughing stock of the entire school."
At least I know what I want, and I'm not ashamed of it.
"You should be. It's revolting."
You didn't find it revolting in the garage. In fact, you were the one who touched me first.
"I wish to God I had never done that. I'll never do it again."
That's what you say now. Tomorrow, you'll come begging. I know your type. You and the head prefect and others like you. Pretend that you're normal or that you know you're doing it because you can't get a girl. But in the end, you're no different from me.
Then I hit him. One moment he was sitting on the bed, the next moment he was on the floor. We stared at each other, both of us shocked by my swift, violent reaction. Then he got up, and without a word, he crossed to the door and opened it. He stood for a moment, as if waiting for me to ask him to stay, but I didn't. He shut the door and went down the hall, and I began to put the Scrabble game away.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Brandon, I want to ask you this. You are one of the only, or one of the very few openly gay actors in Sri Lanka. Is it difficult for you to find work? Does that hamper you in any way?
I mean, firstly, I think I'd just like to think of myself as an actor, with everything else being secondary, But I mean, in terms of acting, it's just one of the many things I do. And I think I've been very fortunate to have spent a lot of my life in theater, to have worked with some amazing people. So I've never not had work on the basis of my identity or on the basis of my sexual orientation. Like, that hasn't been used against me at any point in time. In fact, I think in some instances it's even worked in my favor. And I have to say that. Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to say that certainly it was very important when Deepa Mehta was delighted to cast you, and she was thrilled that you were openly gay and unafraid of being so. And you're also a novelist, of course. I know that much. So there's not so many, and a songwriter. Lots, too many qualities to mention.
Yeah, and I feel like I think there's always been a focus on the work. The work has always come first. The work has always been important, and the work we do, I think, as actors, as performers, as creative artists, it always takes center stage. And to put our identity ahead of our work, I think sometimes is a little bit like, when people say there was a female driver, or of the 3 people arrested yesterday, two were also women. It's like all of these unconscious and very conscious biases that we deal with from time to time, which I think, it's time to get over.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Rehan, you're up next with the next little scene. It's a page or two after the scene that we just read.
Ready?
Yeah.
Shehan, I'm sorry.
Why? Why should you be sorry? Everything has worked out for you. You're no longer in ills and burdens. And as for what happened between us, nobody knows about it. You can pretend it never happened.
That's not fair.
He made a dismissive sound and picked up his bag. Without a word, he left the classroom, and I heard him go down the corridor. All that afternoon, I sat on our front veranda, waiting for something. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I couldn't make myself do anything but sit there and wait. Then the phone rang, and I stood up involuntarily. I heard Amma pick up the receiver and call out to Sonali that the call was for her. As I heard Sonali come down the hall to the phone, I realized that I'd been hoping Shehan would call me, or come to say that everything was forgiven. Now I saw the absurdity of my expectation. If I wanted to make up with Shehan, I would have to go to his house and date myself. When I knocked on the gate, the servant woman came immediately, as if she had been sitting on the steps waiting for someone. The expression on her face alarmed me.
What's happened?
Ane, don't know, Baba. From the time Shehan Baba came back, he has been in his room.
I wheeled my bicycle into the driveway and leaned it against a tree. She followed me, saying,
I've only seen him once like this before, and that was when his mother left. What a calamity that was. But who can blame the lady? Husband was always out of the country on business, never had time for his family. If not for me, I don't know what would have happened to the Baba after his mother left.
I looked at her, puzzled, wondering why she was telling me all this. She asked me to come with her into the house. When we got to the second floor landing, I approached Shahan's door and listened. Inside, I could hear him walking around. I knocked on the door and called out.
Shehan!
He stopped pacing.
Shehan?
What?
Open the door.
No, leave me alone.
What are you doing?
Nothing.
If you're doing nothing, let me in then.
Did that old woman ask you to come?
No, I came because I wanted to see you.
Tell that woman to go away. Then I'll let you in. I turned to the servant and asked her to go downstairs. She reluctantly agreed. She went halfway down the stairs and watched me. Shahan opened the door. His face was grimy from weeping. He still had his school clothes on and his shirt hung out of his trousers. He closed the door behind me and bolted it, then gestured towards the bed for me to sit down. I did so.
Shehan, I really need to apologize. I was so angry at you.
He raised his hand to say that he had already forgiven me, yet he continued to look miserable.
Now everything is okay now?
Can't bear it. As long as you were there, I didn't mind being at hills and burdens. And now that you're gone, I don't know what I'll do. He stopped himself, and I could tell that he was on the verge of tears again. He moved his hand as if willing himself not to cry. Then he went to the window and stood there for a long time, looking out at the playground across from his house. I can't stand the constant punishment. If I don't get out of this, I think. He fell silent, and his expression was so serious that I felt afraid. I understood now why the servant woman had been so worried about him. She, who knew him so well, was aware that he had reached his limit.
Thank you, Rehan. Rehan,
Yes.
you are better known, or you were well known as a film director here of short films like Didi and Red Mustang. What was it like when the iconic Deepa Mehta cast you in this film? For once in your life, you were not behind the camera, but in front of it. Was that nerve-wracking?
Yeah, I mean, it was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying because I had zero acting experience, no films, no plays, nothing. And I just kind of blagged my way through 3 rounds of auditions. So when I turned up on set, I was pretty sure Deepa was going to fire me. Thankfully, she didn't. But I mean, it's a strange one because I think taking on this role, I felt a certain responsibility to portray Shahan as honestly as possible. And I think this was no minor task given he's such a deeply nuanced and richly textured character who kind of plays an integral role in Archie's development and his awakening. But I'm just really lucky that I had Deepa there because I feel like her trust kind of boosted my confidence. And it was funny when she called to tell me I'd gotten the role. She said, "Listen, I think your auditions were brilliant because you've been directing actors in your own films for 8 years, and so you were able to follow my directions." So I think that gave me some kind of hope, going forward. And just trying to think back. I mean, when we were on set, I've said this in other interviews, but she was kind of I feel like Deepa is the film school or the acting school I never really had. And I feel like she taught me how to convey my own directorial vision more authentically and respectfully. But you also had, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, although you were the actor there, did you secretly watch how she was directing and did you pick up tips from that and learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. She had a very clear vision of what she wanted, which made my job a whole lot easier. And and I'm sure the other guys felt like this as well, but she feel like she created a safe space within which we didn't feel afraid to fail. And I think that whenever there was any kind of uncertainty, she'd kind of guide us towards a solution. But it was also, I mean, it was also very collaborative, you know. Certainly for me, like the dialogue on the page was kind of treated more as a blueprint, which meant that we were constantly improvising in between and during takes, and I frequently shuffle lines around, you know, sometimes even creating new dialogue on the spot to keep scenes fresh. Funny enough, these are all techniques I use on my own films, and I think looking back on it, I think my directing background too subconsciously allowed me to approach the role of Shehan with like a second and third pair of eyes. But yeah, I guess, I mean, initially, even though I was initially terrified, you know, of being in front of the camera, I was deeply fortunate to have like this very supportive and protective mentor by my side, guiding me through the darkness, kind of helping me bring, I think, a sense of empathy and sensitivity to the role, and also making the acting experience so rich and fulfilling, like my first acting experience, so rich and fulfilling.
Thank you, Rehan. Could we have Shyam back on, please? I'd like to ask him a few questions about the film. Shyam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back.
Shyam, how easy or difficult was it? Now, you co-wrote this screenplay with Deepa. In fact, you've been working on a screenplay for a very long time before, and then you co-wrote the final product with Deepa. How difficult or easy was it for you to adapt your own work? I mean, were you too close to it at any point? Did you feel that as a hindrance?
Well, I mean, I attempted an adaptation in the early 90s with Gurinder Chadha. That wasn't successful, I think, because we put too much of the novel in it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And then I'd seen subsequent adaptations, including one by an Oscar-winning screenwriter, which I didn't like at all, which I thought somehow failed the book. And so I just pulled it from when that option came up. I just pulled the book and I said it was never going to be made into a film. And then I decided to do it on my own. So I actually did the screenplay on my own and just, you know, treated it as a kind of raw product. I mean, for me, it's always the book is always not a sacred thing. It's just a simple, that draft got published. So I just use it as a kind of more like a raw material and fitted it to the screenplay structure, which is very structured. And then I showed it to my agent and he really liked it. And he sent it to Deepa. And she really liked it, but she wanted some changes. Mostly she wanted me to put back child RG, which I had taken. I'd taken out the RG and Radha section. And so I just worked on it from there. I mean, she would send me notes. I would do the notes, send it back to her. She would have little comments, and then I'd do those as well. And the screenplay just grew from draft to draft in that way. And then at the end, when she went for a pre-production, she just took it and made it her own, which anyways is what should happen and what I fully expected would happen. So yeah, that was the process.
Reading that novel, I must have read it now at least 4 times. I just read it again prior to doing the show. I realized there's a huge amount of narrative, a lot of stuff in RG's head. Was there any particular reason why you didn't want or need to use a voiceover?
I hate voiceovers in adaptations of novels. It just sounds like it's a cheap device. So I was determined not to use adaptation and not to use a voiceover, and as a challenge is not to try and do it without it. And I think it was successful without having the voiceover. The thing to do is when you come to that moment of interiority that need to be on the screen in some ways, to externalize it in some way. So like, for example, the opening shot of them running on the beach and doing the whole thing for the train. It just, to me, that captures the sort of magnificence in which RG sees himself in a way it wouldn't have if you just had a child looking at himself in a mirror with the bright costume on. Because what works in novel at that moment is his interiority, in which he sees himself as a Malini Fonseca, as the Geeta Kumar singer. He sees himself as a star, right? He's performing for the multitudes. So that's what I mean. You take that interiority and then you find a visual way to externalize it.
It's an absolutely beautiful scene, that opening scene where he's running the train going past him. Okay, we're kind of running out of time. I just want you to tell me one other thing. 27 years and people's reactions and acceptance of the novel has changed. What has actually changed for the gay community in your eyes? You've been coming back and forth, so you've been able to
For the Sri Lankan, I think that there's still a lot of homophobia and a lot of prejudice, and I wish this stupid law would change because it's so irrelevant. I think that perhaps the difference from, say, when the book first came out and I first met Sri Lankan gay queer people, and now is that at the beginning, the people I met thought that the problem was themselves, and now people know for sure that the problem isn't themselves. The problem is society, and that's a huge change, I think, and it's a very good change. So I think that has changed for sure, and it keeps on. I keep on seeing an increasing sense among younger Sri Lankan queer people that a sort of sense of pride in themselves and a sense that there's nothing wrong with me. And that's difficult to do in a society where even the psychiatry business is still sort of back in the 1920s, you know. So I think that I really have a lot of admiration for young queer Sri Lankan people who feel this way against great odds.
Shyam Selvadurai, thank you very much for those wise words. And a huge thanks to Nimmi Harasgama, Damian Ingram, Rehan Mudannayake for acting in what was an absolutely delightful film from an iconic novel. Thank you all, and a great thanks to the British Council for organizing this event. Take care.
Thank you. And thank you,